Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Tonight we are processing the aftermath of the latest sweeping indictment of Donald Trump delivered by a Georgia grand jury less than 24 hours ago, announced last evening. Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis accuses the ex-president of being involved in a criminal enterprise to reverse the 2020 election results under the state's racketeering law. In a press conference last night, Willis said she will seek a speedy trial and a start date within the next 6 months, and that Donald Trump must turn himself into the authorities in Fulton County by the end of next week, as will his 18 indicted co-conspirators. So this is now the fourth indictment of the ex-president in a little over 4 months. It brings the total number of felony charges he faces to 91. As the folks at Insider noted, before Donald Trump, the average number of felonies charged per president of the United States was 0. After the Georgia indictment, it's up to 1.9 felonies per president, averaged across all 45 men. Now, Donald Trump has what I like to call the roommate problem. You know, when you have a friend who complains about their bad roommate, and then they get a new roommate, and they keep complaining about the new roommate, and then the third roommate, who is also apparently terrible, until you are forced to conclude that it is your friend who is, in fact, the bad roommate. Any rational person would have to conclude at this point that it is far more likely that Donald Trump is the bad roommate, the serial wrongdoer, than what he claims, which is that the whole world is out to get him. But all the people that support him, the party, the Republican allies, will not state that obvious truth. So instead, every time he commits a new offense or he is charged with committing an offense we all already know, they have to come up with a painful new form of special pleading. It goes all the way back to Donald Trump's first impeachment after he was caught red-handed, attempting to use the vast powers of the presidency to extort a foreign leader into manufacturing dirt in his political opponent and tilt the election. At that time, Republicans claimed it should be up to the voters to judge him in the next election.
Removing the president is not a last resort. We have an election in November, which is a far better and a lot less damaging remedy.
That decision needs to be made by the voters.
I would say let the voters decide.
Well, we did. We let the voters decide, and they voted him out by 5 million votes. And then, after he was voted out, Donald Trump concocted a scheme to destroy the American constitutional republic. He incited a violent insurrection at the Capitol, which led to his second impeachment. Now, Senate Republicans managed to delay that second impeachment trial until after Trump left office, where they then said that because he was no longer president, it made no sense to impeach him. See how that works? Let someone else deal with him.
We have no power to convict and disqualify a former office holder who is now a private citizen. We have a criminal justice system in this country. We have civil litigation. And former presidents are not immune from being accountable by either one.
So first impeachment, let the voters decide. We let the voters decide. He tries to foment a coup, but it's too late because he's no longer president, so let the courts sort him out. So he went free. And the special pleading by Republicans continued over the past 4 months and 4 criminal indictments as the courts started to sort things out. When Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg charged Donald Trump in connection with the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels in 2016, they claimed he was just a rogue local prosecutor out to get Trump for something that happened a long time ago. But then when the ex-president was caught with boxes full of classified documents that he stored in his bathroom, well, then they said the Justice Department, this time the national prosecutor, not a local prosecutor, but this was the Justice Department being weaponized by Joe Biden. And what about Joe Biden's garage? And when that same special counsel, Jack Smith, brought the second federal indictment against Trump for trying to steal the 2020 election, they said he was trying to take away the ex-president's First Amendment rights. And now that he's being prosecuted in Georgia under the racketeering statute, not the weaponized Biden Justice Department, now we're back to another rogue prosecutor going after him for political reasons from a liberal jurisdiction. When you put it all together, it's ludicrous. It's obviously plainly reverse engineered around defending Donald Trump over all else. We know that. I mean, the people offering these defenses know that too. We all know it. Today, Senator Lindsey Graham even brought back an old hit. Let the voters choose.
The American people can decide whether they want him to be president or not. This should be decided at the ballot box, not in a bunch of liberal jurisdictions trying to put the man in jail.
The voters did choose. that chose. I was there. I covered it. You were there too, Lindsay, in 2020. And then Donald Trump unleashed a mob to bash in the brains of the Capitol Police as the braying hooligans erected a gallows and called for Mike Pence to be hanged, which he wasn't, luckily. As ridiculous as this all seems, there's an important principle here. There is one. And this is actually where we sort of hit the foundation of it all. It's best embodied in an often quoted line. You might see it online a lot. It actually comes from a comment on a political science blog. It goes like this, quote, conservatism consists of exactly one proposition. There must be in-groups whom the law protects but does not bind, alongside out-groups whom the law binds but does not protect. It goes hand in hand with another saying, another way of saying, which is often attributed to a Latin American dictator, which goes like this, for my friends, everything, for my enemies, the law. Right? The core idea here, which animates all the defenses from Donald Trump and his, frankly, pathetic lackeys, is that there is no such thing as democratic equality in the law. That's a fiction or ludicrously naive or not even desirable. No. That's not what is the reality. It's not what we should want. What we should want and what there is are people who should be in power and they can do whatever they want to the other people who should be subject to that power. And it just depends on which side of the line you are. See, Fani Willis and Alvin Bragg, who the president calls racist, you can figure out why. Jack Smith, they're the wrong kind of people. They don't get the power to prosecute people like Trump. The law should not be in their hands. The law should not protect them. They should not be able to wield the law. Donald Trump, well, he represents the right kind of people who the law should never touch. The law should be in his hands, and he can do with it whatever he wants. There is no value-neutral sense of equal justice. None of it. It's cynicism all the way down. It's the core contention of authoritarianism, of anti-democratic right-wing reaction through literally the centuries. I mean, going back. And it's the core contention of Donald Trump himself, who hates democracy and has always been kind of clear about that. It's the core contention that animated the sack of the Capitol. It's the core contention that animates all of our politics as this moment. Is there really such a thing as democratic reality? As democratic equality? Are we all really equal under the eyes of the law? Is that how it is, and is that how it should be? Or is there a group of people who get to run the country with an iron fist, even if they are the minority, because the power belongs to them in some deeper sense? And that latter proposition is what the Republican Party stands for right now.